You're listening to CDKL5 in color. I'm Marissa, and on this podcast, I'm joined by my co host Amanda, and sometimes some very special guests to talk all things CDKL5 Deficiency Disorder. It's a rare genetic condition caused by changes in the CDKL5 gene. Patients with this condition often experience profound developmental disabilities, difficult to control seizures that start in infancy, cortical visual impairment, and a variety of other health concerns. It's a challenging condition, but we know that by sharing our stories, we can raise awareness, provide support, and paint pictures of our community that can lead to greater understanding and meaningful change for families like ours. Let's jump right in. Hi, Amanda.
Hey, Marissa.
How's it going?
It's good. It's a rainy morning in Colorado, and we don't see many of these. So I'm
Yeah,
feeling
it
a
doesn't rain
little
that much there.
no, especially for long periods of time. So, yeah. So,
Well, that's
anyhow,
nice.
it's good to be here.
Awesome. Well, October is AAC Awareness Month. So we're going to talk about AAC today. AAC stands for Augmentative and Alternative Communication. It refers to a variety of methods and tools used to communicate when spoken language is a challenge. AAC often utilizes AT, or assistive technology, to aid in communication. So things like picture boards, tablets, switches, vocal output devices, eye gaze devices, all types of things. And the goal of AAC is to enable individuals with complex communication needs to express themselves as effectively as possible. We know for a fact that communication is one of the most important things to CDKL5 families. The question of can people with CDKL5 utilize AAC? The answer is absolutely yes, of course they can. And at what age can they start?
It's never too early. I would start as early as you would start with any other kid, right? We read to babies, emergent literacy. We'll talk about that a little bit later, but it's all part of learning to communicate, no matter what your communication looks like. So I, in hindsight, wish I would have focused on communication as much, if not more, as physical therapies. So I think talk to and find a speech therapist when you get the diagnosis. Because I think that's something you wonder too, like, why do I need a speech therapist? This kid's 4 months old. But you really can, I think, get some great support and get a good foundation to move towards an AAC device the earlier you start.
Some people think, well, my kid doesn't talk, so why do I need a speech therapist? Well, here's why, right? Your speech therapist isn't to get your kid to talk. If the likelihood that your kid is not going to talk, I mean, your kid has CDKL5, the likelihood is they're not going to have spoken language. There are some kids that do. There are some adults that do. People
It's
living
very
with
minimal, though.
CDKL5. Yeah, but
Yeah.
it's not that many. Most of our kids
Yeah.
are not going to utilize spoken language. How do we want them to engage with their world? They have to find a different way.
Right. And I just want to add, I have met a lot of lovely people who have maybe a couple hundred words in vocabulary that still utilize AAC to expand that vocabulary. So just because you can talk doesn't mean there's not something in it for you to use AAC.
Absolutely. That's a good point. So speech therapist, it's for someone who wants to communicate, and everybody wants to communicate and can communicate in some way or shape. And you can get speech therapy really early. You don't have to wait. You don't have to.
No.
I'm trying to think when we had speech therapy. I guess we had speech therapy in combination with feeding therapy when my son was an infant. He probably was a little over a year. Maybe he was about a year when we had a speech therapist enter our life. We were working with switches at the time.
That's cool. So, Ava's older. The world is technology has come a long way since she was born. So we were referred to PT to get into early intervention, but once they come and did the assessments for EI, we had speech on board right away too. Ava was not diagnosed, so I didn't know she wasn't going to talk. So we had a little bit different early therapy experience with speech. But I think with that said, it wasn't a bad experience. I just encourage you, if you can find someone who understands or has some experience with AAC, make that a goal. But I think most speech therapists have access to literature and the body of knowledge within their discipline to help you, even if they don't.
What are some of the unique challenges? We were talking about, when your child has a CDKL5 diagnosis, there are some unique challenges to utilizing AAC that they face that maybe somebody else who might also be an AAC user doesn't face. So some of the things we came up with were, one, motor planning, motor skills.
Yeah. I mean, your eyes are, when you're using AAC, if you're using eye gaze, that's motor planning, and it's very difficult motor planning. So that's one example of motor skills, right? And we also have to move our hand or our foot or our head or something to access a switch. Or if we're writing things on a board, we have to be able to move our, position ourselves to see what's written on the board.
Vision's another challenge. So
Um,
vision, motor planning, and then
Positioning, right?
right.
Yeah. And I would argue that CVI is actually helpful in this aspect because kids with CVI tend to like to look at two-dimensional contrasting things like a screen. And you can use a lot of accessibility functions on any kind of screen to kind of make that contrast whatever they prefer. And there are a lot of games and things like that now that people have come up with apps that really draw their eyes to start that pre AAC activities, with anyone who will look at a screen. So back to how early should we start, right? If you can look at a iPad screen or a tablet, you can kind of start getting them to attend to something with their eyes, which is also going to come into your TBI discipline. So they can help also with AAC.
Right. It all overlaps.
Yes.
All the therapies overlap.
They do overlap, and communication is the one thing that should be able to spill into every discipline you're interacting with.
I think for vision, my son obviously has CVI, but he lived in phase 1 of CVI for many, many years, and he's just sort of crossing into phase 2 a little bit. So he actually doesn't visually attend very much at all. So getting him to look at things, even I remember when you had the little board books when they were a
Mhm,
baby, because you were talking about
mhm,
literacy. Literacy is
mhm,
important for communication. There's little
mhm.
board books and early reader books, and you're trying to read to him. One of the things that really, I don't want to say frustrated me, but it made me feel, I'm going to say sad, but that's not the word I want, but it made me feel like it wasn't as fun as it could have been or should have been or would have been, is the fact that my son didn't look at any of the pictures in the book. He didn't look at any of the things in the book. He didn't attend to the book. He loves being read to. He gets very quiet. I think he really likes the cadence of reading and people speaking to him. But, when you read to a little kid and you hold the book up and they're pointing and you're pointing and it's, oh, look at this and what color's this? And, it makes it so much more interactive and fun. And it wasn't like that. It's still not like that. My son's 9. It's still not like that when we're reading. I'll say, oh, the boy, he has a blue shirt, but I'm not confident he's noticing where I'm pointing or anything like that. And
So we experienced that. Ava was fortunate to be in a private preschool for blind and visually impaired students, and the iPad didn't come out till she was 4 years old. So all of this technology was not available yet. So we were doing things that they did with these types of learners before we had screen tech. And one of the big things that Ava started with her speech therapist at Anchor Center was tactile cues. So with that being said, we would try to position things where she could see them. Ava, when she was assessed around age 4, still sometimes had as much as a 2-minute wait time where we would ask her to do something, and they were very good. They would be in this room that was soundproof. They would give her the command and they would sit there quietly and wait while I looked through a two-way mirror. And it blew my mind the first time I saw her sit there and process. It was like 1 minute and 42 seconds. And finally she turned her head and did what they'd asked. They never asked again. They gave her that time. So wait time is important, one. But two, you can maybe think of whatever story you're reading, pick something from it. Like, is there a horse? Is there some kind of tactile horse? Or is it the color you want them to pay attention to? Or, there are different ways. Yeah. And another tactile cue I'll say we played with a lot was like hand washing. We had a rag, just things that you commonly can pair up with the language you're trying to get them to pay attention to. Here's something that is in your environment that you'll see over and over again, no matter where that language is used. Those are some things that can be helpful to think about tactile cues. Maybe think about the one thing you want to focus on in that story of your child picking up on and giving a meaning that's has some kind of symbolic and spoken connection.
now that you're mentioning those tactile things, I remember in early intervention, they used to bring boxes of, like, had a storybook and then it had actual things
The
that went
character,
along with the
yeah.
story. Yes, yes, I do remember doing that. Yeah,
Yeah.
absolutely.
So, I mean, and you start there and then listen, I am a firm believer that our kids can hear and they can, get the point. And sometimes we have to move on, even if they don't demonstrate they've gotten the point, because who wants to hear the same story or talk about the same thing over and over again just because you're not demonstrating the way I'm asking you to demonstrate that you got it, you understood, or you heard. Maybe they do have it and they don't like it. I had a very hard time with IEP goals, letters and numbers and things that just continued over and over again. I'm like, move on, try something different. Like, this is not, what is the function and purpose of being stuck in this really rigid way of thinking about literacy and communication, quite frankly.
When Gregory was little and we were doing early intervention, we started with switch toys to get him familiar with utilizing switches. And part of the challenge was he keeps his hands really close and his arms really close to his body. He's not someone who reaches out for things. So in order for him to physically be able to access the switch, it would have to be really close to his body, which made it really difficult to determine, was he hitting the switch intentionally or not? And of course, you have to assume that he's hitting it intentionally. And he played with switch toys for many, many years. He still does actually play with switch toys, and I switch them out. We have a bunch in a box and I switch them out for him, and he still does play with them. He'll roll onto it and roll back, roll onto it and roll back, things like that. But at school, so he's 9, he's in 3rd grade, he has this, I think they call it like a mid-tech device. It's a vocal output. It has 3 red, green, and a yellow like plates, and they're in front of him. And so the red one, I think, says, I need a break. And, they say 3 different things, whatever it is. And so he has that at school in addition to having an eye gaze at school. He doesn't have that at home. I can't even imagine what we would put as the vocal output when he was at home.
Well, I mean, we still have lots. Ava loves switches. She loves, you can buy some really inappropriate switches off of like Amazon that are like gaggy, jokey type switches that she gets a kick out of. Ava really loves music. Ava also loves like a fan, like that blowing of a fan. And Ava likes lights, like bubble tube lights, things like that. So we worked into some of her goals, some of her break times or preferential times of like, if you do this a non-preferred task, when you get to that end of this task, you can come over here and do this thing, right? And then they would put these preferred things on a switch and make her activate, deactivate, whatever it be, so she could try to find some independence with her preferred things and also have to do the work of her non-preferred activities to, have some time with a preferred activity. So, I mean, alternative tech is it's so amazing what all is out there now that please like explore things beyond what we're talking about today, because I think that there is a lot of stuff that is affordable now that I probably haven't even seen. I mean, we have a big switch we play with that is a cymbal toy, and we use it for Ava to bend over to the floor. We use it in music therapy as a motor, as a motor job, but it really is it's a switch activity where she gets an output she likes, and we make her do some midline work and cross hands and too, which music is very motivating for her. So if that's something that motivates your child, there's a lot of different ways you can incorporate music into these, whether it's a device or a switch or an activity.
I have heard professionals actually who are not really familiar with kids with these multiple profound disabilities and CVI say that someone with CVI can't use an eye gaze. And we know that's not true. But I
I
want
know
you to
that.
tell everybody.
Yeah.
I want you to tell everybody. My son just started. Well, I shouldn't say this. My son first tried an eye gaze when he was around 2. And we were blown away that he could even activate anything on the screen. I was completely blown away. And then we had a good chunk of time, over a year, of really poor health. And so everything just sort of was on the back burner. But then he ended up getting an eye gaze when he was, I think, in kindergarten. And he's still in the early stages of utilizing it. But I want you to tell everybody about Ava using her eye gaze and the progression of how she got where she is. And tell us about that.
Yeah. So Ava was diagnosed a little bit later in life. And when we figured out what was going on with her, I was familiar with the Rett community, but just figuring out how CDKL5 and Ava fit into the picture and being able to look at some of the things that was going on over there and try to apply them in our life. One of the things I first noticed was eye gaze, right? There was a lot of communication work being done in the Rett field at that time. And it got me thinking, like, we have to try this, right? Ava loved the iPad. Like, she liked to play on an iPad and do things. And every device she's had has been both eye gaze and touch. So she could access them either with a direct select method with her hand or with her eye. So the problem was getting the data to show that she was proficient enough for insurance to purchase a device. So the first device she ended up getting was called the Dynavox. And, at least we got it. We could collect the data to show that she was proficient and could do things. But when we got the device, it really was not implemented well. There's going to be a link in the show notes to some speech therapists talking about this. Essentially, what they did for Ava was set up on this big, heavy device, a 4-square selection that you just described as mid. You don't need an AAC device to give somebody 4 choices, right? These devices are for stringing together vocabulary to have something to say. And I think that's important. We don't test on an AAC device. We don't demand somebody to tell us something on a device. I mean, that's not how we talk. Somebody doesn't say to you, "You tell me now." Or when they do say that to you, it's usually not received well, right? It's not how you get people to get to know you and talk to you a little bit more. So there was some frustration around how the device was being used, how people were limiting Ava's use because of, how the device was set up. And I found a different speech therapist. And when I found this speech therapist, the first thing they did was said she needs a different device. And the Tobys were coming around with the triangulated eye gaze. The cameras were excellent in a Toby. And around the time she was 8 or 9, we started working on funding her a Toby device. And with that device and the triangulation of the cameras, it started to become clear to me that the periphery vision, that those cameras can pick up on periphery. So if we could position Ava well and get a really structured activity going, she could kind of make her way around the device. And so that kind of started her use of an AAC device that was more practical for eye gaze and less about touching or selecting on, we can do that on switches. We could do that on a board. I'll just throw in right now, I carry a whiteboard with me because an AAC device is heavy and hard to have everywhere when you're not in a chair all the time. So I actually carry a whiteboard around and I give Ava choices on a whiteboard when we're not around an AAC device. I know I'm hopping around here, but back to how we move through devices. Being on the Toby was great for the camera, but their software was not ideal for Ava. There was a lot of programming involved. It was a lot of work for me. It was a lot of work to try to get the school to buy into it. And some of the navigation didn't work well for Ava on getting where she needed to be to say what she needed to say. It was complex. There was a lot of pages she would have to go through. When she got to middle school, so 5th grade, we had a falling out over communication. We sat in an IEP meeting one day and they essentially told me Ava couldn't communicate on a device. They weren't going to work on it. And I had an advocate with me and I had a school in mind I was trying to get her to go to, which was AAC focused. It was private, but it was close to home. It was at a therapy center. And as this meeting progressed and we went back and forth, this advocate was a speech therapist. She was a special ed teacher before she went back into speech. And by the time we were trying to wrap the meeting up, the social worker looked across the table at me and said, "Well, Amanda, what do you want her to do? String 4 or 5 words together on that device?" And I nearly lost it. And I dismissed her from the meeting and I told the school my lawyer would be in touch. And they give it a day and they sent me a nice email and said, "Amanda, we're going to send her to the private school." And I said, "Yes." And, it's unfortunate that had to happen, though. I mean, so some of you will still have that fight. I guess is why I even bring that up, that people will tell you they can't, and the person we have says they can't. So we're just not going to work on that. When she got to the AAC school, the therapist working with her there, were getting some good results from her and started moving me towards a PRC device, which had a little bit more dynamic learning. I was really hung up on her CVI and the cameras and access. And, getting past that was this big dynamic screen that felt like busy to me. And I just thought Ava's never going to be able to do this. And Emmy, this lovely speech therapist, was so patient with me. And so we sat down and did some trials and I watched a couple things. In the end, her data was better on this device. And for those of you unfamiliar with AAC that's listening, there are heat maps. It's how it works, the technology for the device. You can see in the background how the eyes move on the device to access whatever they're accessing. So that's how they start to take the data. And so they showed me how good the data was for her on this device that I felt she wasn't ready for. And at the end of the day, she was ready for it and she does really well on it. And the layout is just incredible. It's laid out in a way where there's some dynamic and static parts to each page. So certain language moves along no matter where she goes. And then other language can be custom to the grouping. And it has been great. And it also has a keyboard and it also has a phonetic keyboard. And the same technology that we have with texting is embedded in these keyboards. And what we have also learned is Ava sometimes prefers to be in a keyboard spelling and using predictive text to talk about things. And she loves to hear the phonetics still. So she'll go in sometimes and pull things together on the phonetic keyboard. Sometimes it's really actually funny, like the noises that she strings together. And just in observing and living with Ava, I, in hindsight, wish that we would have focused on the alphabet. There's only 26 letters. I mean, when uppercase, lowercase, we can double that. But spelling, I think, is less learning them letters and how you combine them to make a word, I think is probably less complex than trying to make meaning to all of these really busy symbols that, honestly, they don't mean anything to me. I'm like, what is that triangle and two circles? Like, what does that have to do with if? I would have focused on spelling with Ava a lot more because that's kind of, I talked about emergent literacy a little bit earlier, but Ava's still very much in an emergent literate place. There are some splintered skills she has where if we would have started 15 years earlier with just letters, combining them and doing things like shared reading, I think her communication would look a little bit different. When we were working on getting this new device, we also used something called the alternative pencil. The alternative pencil is kind of this concept of, we can spell and we can do things without using our hands to help our children be literate because you have to kind of have some literacy to have communication, even though we'll just say it's emergent literacy, right? Because being literate and communicating are not the same thing.
And reading and literacy are not the same thing, right?
Exactly. I'll read, and we'll link a emergent literacy page too, but I'm going to read just the first sentence that defines this. It's emergent literacy is the term used to describe the reading and writing experiences of young children before they learn to write and read conventionally. Emergent literacy begins at birth, regardless of whether or not a child has a disability. For older emergent literacy learners, it is important to keep all activities age respectful. And I feel that way. My 20-year-old daughter doesn't need to be doing cartoon stuff. If she likes cartoons, we can talk about that. But it might be that she's never been exposed to anything but, 2-year-old literacy. Ava likes to hear books. We don't do baby books. Usually we have topic-based stuff. She likes horses, and then there's all these readers, right? You can, podcasts, things like that. There's so much access to literacy out there that I just encourage everyone to focus on what makes your child engage and try to find different ways to sprinkle that into their day.
Reading on grade level or reading age appropriate materials has actually made reading more fun for me to read to my son because it's not those baby books where it's so dependent on those pictures.
Yeah.
I've moved on to reading chapter books with him, so I don't feel sad or pressured or disappointed or any of those sort of unpleasant feelings about, oh, he's not looking at the pictures. And you don't need pictures to make meaning of the story.
No,
It's just the story. He's
it's the
listening.
story.
It's made it much more fun for me to be someone who reads to him.
And if you think you want a visual, bring one in that has something to do with the story. That's, 3D. I was not always an easy parent in this whole scheme of things because I really didn't understand literacy. I didn't understand emergent literacy, and it kind of made me abrasive to some types of change that needed to be made. So anyway, we will give you a lot of links to things to go kind of start looking around and thinking about this stuff. But I think that just understanding it makes me a better communication partner to Ava because at the age of 20, she has a very robust device. It's a lamp layout. It's language acquired by motor planning. Eva's eyes know where a symbol is. She's not looking at the picture. So we'll share that with you. Um, but I'm still you model everything. When I talk, if Ava's device is around, like, well, I'll hit what? No, dinner. Ava's really good at telling me good morning. She's really good at naming what we're eating. Is it breakfast? Is it supper? She'll tell me what meal we're eating. She'll tell me if she wants me to get busy and work. She talks about she likes to drink tea. So sometimes I'll get tea, and when I won't give her any because if I don't have decaf tea, I don't load her up on it. But, Ava tells us about what she's motivated about. Ava has a swear page we've added as well, too, which is not anything like too over the top. But, when she gets mad, she can tell me essentially to kick rocks. And there's sometimes she does. Ava loves the word diabolical. And when Ava's feeling diabolical, she navigates on over and lets you know. So, it's a lot and it can be overwhelming, but it's as simple as a whiteboard where I put a letter if I want her to make a choice. And it's as complex as this device where I have to go and search the word because I can't remember how to navigate to it, but somehow my kid can when she really wants to say it. So I think the big question everybody always has is how can I be sure? And my answer to that is if something comes out of Ava's device, I take it for what it is and I throw it back at her and I say, whatever it is, whatever, if it's a request she wants or whatever she says, I say it back and we follow through with that. Make it have meaning if you think it doesn't. And if what they're saying and what it means are two different things, they'll figure it out. I mean, our kids are smart. They think to really think that our kids, maybe don't hear or don't do or don't understand the same way we do. And I just don't believe that. I think they hear fine. I think, Ava really appropriately sometimes when heated things are going on amongst adults or something can throw in some zingers on her device or literally laugh at us. So I think if you just meet them where they're at and respect them and act like they are talking about what they want to be talking about, you'll continue to build the language, access to language that they will utilize. The last thing I'll say is she likes to talk most, and we get the most success out of conversations during mealtime. Her device is positioned, she sits on a chair, it's very easy to access for her, and we're all sitting there talking. So, my one demand for other environments is she always has access to her device when they're eating.
That makes sense, right? I mean, conversation is part of what we do when we're sitting
When,
together eating. It's some of the most conversation I have with my husband is at dinner.
yeah. So,
Otherwise, you're busy.
I don't
She's
know.
busy too.
Well, I feel like I'm such a meanderer when I talk. I feel like I've taken us all over the place, but I mean, I do you
No, I think people are
sir
going to appreciate hearing the success that you guys have had. I think it's hard to find a good speech therapist who understands how to work with kids that are so complex as ours. And that is a challenge that everybody's going to have. And part of educating yourself about how your child is a communicator also includes educating the people they're working with, unfortunately. When my son got diagnosed and we started to have interactions with therapists, my assumption was just like with doctors, you're going to go there, they're going to tell you. They're going to tell you, they're going to tell you. They're going to fix it, they're going to help. They're going to know what to do. And the reality is our kids are really super complex. They're really
yeah,
super complex. And so you have to be an active participant in what's going on with them. And that includes educating yourself so that you can, at the very least, advocate for them to have more than maybe what they would otherwise be given.
yeah. PRC actually has a place on their website where you can go and they have a list of speech therapists in each state that are familiar with AAC. So that might be at least a place to start. I find that I know some of Ava's therapists actually do some telehealth even with kiddos who move and can't find a therapist and they can kind of get on, once you establish a relationship. I mean, that's another thing. There has to be a repertoire between your whoever's working with your child and them. You have to assume there's an ability to learn there and they pick up on that. So just make sure, be mindful of that because we've stalled at times and I'm like, oh, it was the therapist because then we have this big leap when we move on. So, there's a place to start for, I'm pretty sure there's every state they have identified some therapists who know enough about AAC to get devices funded. And that in itself is, a little bit about AAC if you can get funding. So,
We'll link that
um,
in the show note.
yeah. Yeah.
Awesome. Well, I'm excited to open up this conversation, have people start thinking about it, and if people have questions or want to talk more or want to learn more, we can do more about it.
Absolutely, and there's yeah, we know some great people who would come and discuss things, but it's a big bucket, so, what's most important or what particular topics would would you want us to focus on?
Yeah. All right.
All right.
Well, thanks,
Well,
Amanda.
you're welcome, and it was great to see you,
Nice
and
to see you.
we'll chat soon.
All right. Bye bye. Thanks for listening. We hope you'll follow us on social media at CDKL5 in color on Instagram, Facebook, and LinkedIn, and visit us online at www.cdkl5incolor.com. Have questions or a topic you'd like us to chat about? Would you like to be a guest on our podcast? Email us cdkl5incolor at gmail.com and we'll be in touch. Until next time.